Hello, Northstar here with another Northstar Talks Politics. Now, I was going to do a gaming video, but I just didn't have the energy, and I did something that was eating away at me. That I'd talk about here. Um, just seemingly talking politics sometimes comes more natural to me than playing games. My long COVID, I have to do whatever I can manage. So, uh, I sent to my side. I couldn't find the YouTube short where some, honestly, moron said this, but it wasn't hard to find someone saying this bullshit, frankly, with a quick Google search. Uh, and I think this is the same guy who said it in a YouTube short, Dr. Jason Stanley. There are no liberal arts colleges in authoritarian countries. So if you transition to authoritarianism, you have to target colleges and universities as well as education. Uh, Yale professor and author, supposedly. And then some moron agreeing. Of course, this is a lie. There are liberal arts colleges in authoritarian countries, unless you try and very narrowly define authoritarian to exclude anything that happens to have a lot of liberal arts. Any country, um, you could find history programs. History is a liberal arts field, so liberal arts is nebulously defined. You could define it as studies of humanities, like writing, history, you, or even some social sciences, or you could define it as these programs that have very little structure that include a lot more general education. By either definition, you'll find programs like this in a lot of authoritarian countries throughout history. Often the curriculum gets perverted to support whatever nationalistic line the authoritarian countries want to push, but it's always there. If you believe China is authoritarian, then this spits in the face of it. Liberal arts innovations in Chinese higher education, liberal arts general education. This is more the unstructured um, version, and why China wants Western style liberal arts education. But the long and short of this is that uh, you can also see China pushing it in terms of the liberal arts education to criticize from a humanities and so kind of sociology perspective. Uh, Western values it's putting, because this is, of course, biased anti-China, whoever wrote this. Yojana Sharma, I don't know if is that Indian name or is that like a Taiwanese immigrant? I don't know. Or even a Chinese person came to America and disagrees with China's policies. It doesn't matter where they came from. What matters is that it's a bunch of bull. Um, not Western values. Western values is an undefined nebulous term that can mean whatever someone wants it to mean. Capitalist values or individualistic values, which if anyone saw, I did a recent Let's Play of Self Singularity. There's a philosophy unit that rotates in and it correctly describes individualism using what's basically the Wikipedia definition is an ideology that believes nobody owes anything to anyone else. They're basically your only obligation is to yourself in life, which it's a toxic ideology when you realize that's what it actually means. That's come to be given these glowing praise, make it seem like it's a good thing, and not the ideology of psychopaths, basically. And not necessarily just the ideology of the U.S. In fact, countries like the U.S. and a lot of European countries have long histories of, strong communities and people working together to achieve goals, which some might call collectivism. Of course, the Paris Commune was the first major commune in Europe or in North America, and North America, of course, had Native American communities that lived in fairly communalistic, some might call it primitive communes if you're a Marxist, but whether you try and give it a special name or not, whether the Marxists choose to do that, the fact of the matter is still communes, still collectivist ideology. Um, but though I read through these a little, and the long and short of it is that while they debate whether it's a translation of American ideals or Chinese concept, And there's stuff about that that's discussed in this for one article. For instance, the fact is China is heavily investing in new liberal arts programs, and in both quantity and quality. Asia now accounts for 36% of the world's non-U.S. liberal education programs, and growing. And China is leading the way. I say Asia, which underrates, because that includes India, which actually hasn't seen that much growth in liberal arts. So this makes the percentage less impressive than the real number. If you limit to just China, you'll see, like, I don't know, 76% increase. It's massive. They, but no, they average over the whole continent, which is disingenuous. That includes countries that have already kind of reached their peak. Like Singapore has a lot of liberal arts, but it's not growing because they already have a ton. And India has a lot of potential, but isn't growing it because India is fairly right-wing authoritarian these days, except for one state, which is literally ruled by Marxists within India, and actually has the best health, education, and welfare outcomes of any part of India. Because they actually invest in those things in that state. More than 60% of the world's LAS programs outside the US have developed in the last 2 decades, which is to say there's been rapid increase. And some of these countries are undoubtedly authoritarian. I would disagree with the China authoritarian claims, but there's no question that the Indonesian government has a long history of authoritarianism. Singapore's government is definitely authoritarian even today. It's people don't want to call it that because it's capitalist. Free market, so therefore not authoritarian nonsense. The government has a stranglehold on people's rights to free speech, protests. These are heavily controlled in Singapore, and heck, even parts of the market like property and land usage are heavily controlled by Singapore's government. So even economically, they're not as free as people like to pretend. But in terms of social civil rights, it's not a free country. Indonesia, of course, the Indonesian Genocide happened, and it has a long history of authoritarianism, although there's been recent moves away from that with real democracy starting to emerge, slowly but surely. Um, you've, of course, got what are some other countries? Thailand has a still fairly authoritarian government. They've seen growth in liberal arts. It's not like it authoritarian and non-authoritarian alike. Now, enough of those. I can leave one open if you want to read it while I'm talking, but I'm not talking about this at this moment anymore. This did also what stimulated me thinking about this was the topic of math and science initiatives specifically, which kind of runs counter to liberal arts. These have been going on in the U.S. for a long time, and it's not just like Trump trying to devalue liberal arts. I saw someone with a mug that was about a 20-year-old math and science initiative here in the U.S. It's not something that just started like yesterday. Now, math and science initiatives are ostensibly to improve employment opportunities for students. The problem is when you push a bunch of people in the math and science fields, which had great employment opportunities, that's because supply and demand. There was a demand for these people, not a lot of supply. You increase the supply, and the employment markets are no longer so tight in math and science, and the employment opportunities get worse. That is, there's more graduates in this field relative to what the companies need, and they can be pickier and, not hire people if they want wages that are higher, or not hire people if, they're a minority group that the company is secretly discriminating against, or, the hiring manager has biases, or if someone doesn't have the perfect recommendations, whatever bloody thing, you see wages go down, average periods until someone get hired go down, unless, well, then you see governments, often state governments in the U.S., well, okay, we'll give tax credits, tax benefits to companies in math science come into our state. Okay, well, so now you've created jobs, but now you've also hurt your source of revenue to do programs, and you've increased inequality because you cut taxes in those companies. That means more profit because the tax profit's not being taxed as much. That means the stockholders, the shareholders, will either get stock buybacks and dividends, or the money will be reinvested, which will just lead to even more stock buybacks and dividends in the long run, because that's where it all goes. Everything that's not reinvested in terms of profit, that is, profit is money in excess of wages. It's not going to wages. It's going to stock buybacks and dividends and into the pockets of the very rich. And then what do they do with that money? They don't just sit on it. Then they do things like invest in private equity firms to buy up all the housing in a market, driving up housing prices. Or they, start for-profit universities, making education more expensive. Or, they invest in other companies that buy up their competitors, and pretty soon all the food production is owned by 6 companies like we're at now. I mean, it's a little more than 6 companies, but I think it was like 6 or 7 companies own like 80% of the food production in the U.S. or something crazy like that. Obviously, there's not precise figures, but heck, I can probably find something for you guys with a quick Google search here. Most U.S. food production owned by handful companies, and I'll get you some statistics. Food monopolies in the future. A handful of powerful companies control the majority share of almost 80% of dozens of grocery items bought regularly. A joint investigation by The Guardian and Food and Water Watch found that consumer choice is largely an illusion, despite supermarket shelves and fridges beaming with different brands. Let's talk about America, even though Guardian is a British newspaper, but they have a lot of American readers. The size, power, and profits of these mega companies have expanded thanks to political lobbying and weak regulations. Also, antitrust legislation had its heart cut out back in the Reagan days, and this has just slowly been destroying America ever since. Only 15 cents of every dollar spent in the supermarket goes to farmers. The rest goes to processing and marketing and profit, of course. This is a classic example of anything but class analysis. They will intentionally write out words like profit, ruling class, capitalist, investor class, workers. There's an attempt to dance around these terms. The consolidation runs deep. 4 humans or fewer control at least 50% of the market for 79% of the groceries. For almost a third of shopping items, the top firm controls at least 75% of the market share. Now it goes through various different things. You can see the high levels of consolidation. Big food is getting bigger. This is not just a problem that's plateaued. It's getting worse every year. For shoppers, it might seem like choices galore, but most of their favorite brands are actually owned by a handful of food giants. That's a key thing to realize. You see all these different brands. You think they're all different companies. Nope. It's often like one company that owns all the brands. Like Anheuser-Busch has been buying up a bunch of beer brands and keeps the names, but they're all Anheuser-Busch at that point. Another source of confusion is private labels, supermarkets' own brands, of which little is known about the producer, which appear in the top 4 of the 77% of groceries looked at. Private labels account for a large market share, but often the producers are actually the same factories that are these handful of brands. So there's not that much competition there either. A spate of mega mergers means the meat packing plants, one of the ones that's undergone the most consolidation, are now controlled by just a handful of multinationals. Proponents of capitalism claim mergers, acquisitions during efficiencies that cut costs. Well, yes, they do cut costs for the manufacturer, but they do not keep prices down. Evidence has shown they do not benefit consumers by keeping price down. All the benefits and efficiency end up going straight to the stockholders, which, thanks to Reagan's changes, that cannot. The antitrust legislation is required to consider the profits of stockholders in their decision making in such a way that basically, if it can be shown that the same amount of money is going around either way, then trust can't be broken up. But that's bullshit, because every cent that extra is charged consumers would necessarily be an extra cent of profit for shareholders. So therefore, you can never break up trust, no matter how much they price gouge, unless it can be shown that it's stifling innovation, which is a hard thing to prove. Therefore, the antitrust legislation has, since Reagan's time, had its heart cut out. Plus, they're required to have air quote experts, which ends up being a handful of like 15 people who cycle around and act as experts in every one of these cases, and they're often on the payroll of these large companies. The government sometimes hires them too, but they get most of their income from the large companies, so they mostly owe their loyalty to them because the government cannot keep up with the amount of money the companies pay them, even though the government hires the same experts. It's a very screwed up system, and the result of this has been with a handful of hire four hire experts who just really do whatever their paymasters say, like whoever hires them, they'll make up stuff to support their side. And the rules that Reagan put in place for antitrust mega mergers never get stopped hardly anymore. There's increasingly very little competition in the U.S. markets, and it's only going to get worse. It's not like this is the thing that's flat. I keep having to emphasize to people whenever I talk about these political trends. Sometimes think, well, it's always been like that. No, it's been getting worse every single year. These are trends that are sometimes even getting exponentially worse. So the rate things get worse is getting faster. It's accelerating. It's not even maybe starting to slow down how much it gets worse. It's actually getting worse faster each year, which you can very quickly see if we're not even, assume it's an S curve, assume it won't get faster forever. If we're not even at the point where the S curve starts to level out, it's going to level out at a point that is not sustainable, that's really going to fuck up our society. So, yeah. And as for these math and science initiatives, as I was saying, increase the supply and demand. Increase the supply, you don't increase the demand for math and science. You're going to have problems. If you increase both by doing tax credits, you're cutting out the government revenue. Governments like this partly because a lot of times you can cut some people out of poverty with like the math and science initiatives, even if it cuts wages for some of the engineers and mathematicians and such, because they have more competition for their jobs. So it has a leveling effect. But at the same time, by lifting people out of poverty, the governments don't have to pay out as much in welfare for the people who are stuck in poverty. So they saves money, and what they do, they cut taxes on the rich with that money, which just makes inequality worse. The super rich, they make it so there are fewer higher paid jobs that are dependent on your labor. And it becomes more and more the only way to get rich is to own a lot of capital or to have family connections, so you can get these a few cushy jobs that are maintained at the top of the corporate food chain, which is basically just a type of social capital, which is to say those who have money stay rich when even the engineering jobs don't pay well anymore. And not only all that, but there's all kinds of feedback loops with regards to, you've got people come in from overseas with their skills, math, science, stuff like this. So as part of the benefit of lower salaries, I guess this is going to reduce the fact salaries go down because they were already there competing, but it's also going to mean that part of the benefit to companies goes overseas. I guess that actually undercuts this trend a little bit because people move around between countries and labor markets to some degree. And that makes companies somewhat indifferent whether they just bring in someone from overseas or hire a local graduate. But what is true, though, is you do math science, where does the money come from? It comes from English programs, even though writing has been shown to be an extremely important skill that helps to gain jobs. Doesn't necessarily produce more value for the companies, but it helps people compete for jobs. This is not really about helping people compete for jobs. This is about making money for the rich, because the government is basically bought and sold to the rich. Buy and sold to the rich, and so they'd rather have math and science skills than writing that maybe makes someone more impressive to hire but doesn't generate more value. And history, which it's very much in the interest of rich people not to know their history, because if they know their history, they'll realize that they've been getting screwed for a long time and it's getting worse. People like them by the rich that class struggle is a real thing. They might even become socialists. Gasp. Americans do not learn their history, and that's very much in the interest of the powerful. So, and then stuff like music and art, which may not have much direct economic value, may not even lead to people band together into like unions and class struggle, any of that, but it does improve people's quality of life, helps with their mental health, gives them something to balance out stress with. So there are costs to these math and science initiatives, and then you just end up depressing wages to some degree. And um, it's, I don't know. I say this, I fully support people needing to learn math and science, but not necessarily at the expense of other programs. We need more funding for education overall. Of course, a better funded education program instead of one that just shifts money around would cost the rich money because you'd have to tax more because no one else has more money to pay in taxes. So that does not happen under capitalism. All right, well, that's been my Northstar Talks Politics. 21 minutes. I think that's plenty to have listened to me talk. A little bit of proof there that China is upscaling its liberal arts education, that Asia in general has seen a rise. I didn't produce any articles on places like Thailand and Indonesia, but they're doing as well, from what I understand. There's even a little in Singapore. It's just percentage-wise, not that much. And some of these countries are authoritarian. I would argue China is not, but some of the others that are upscaling liberal arts definitely are. And I don't know. I just thought I would poke holes in a little bit in that claim because this idea that liberal arts doesn't exist in authoritarian regimes is a lie. And when you believe in lies, you are less able to assess the world around you accurately, to respond appropriately. There are many dangerous things that Trump is doing, but his math and science emphasis at the expense of liberal arts is hardly new, and it's hardly quite the danger people make it out to be, whereas there's much more dangerous things he's doing there flying under the radar. So that's this. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Till next time, take care of each other, be kind to yourselves, and may you always find a guiding star to lead you home. Adieu. Best luck with everything, viewers.